Right, we have had the CHILCOT report from the CHILCOT inquiry, as it's known. And so this is after CHILCOT now. Obviously we're in a position where we know what has been said and what's been thought about Tony Blair's decision to go to war, and the intelligence it was based on, and various things about the Iraq war, Iraq 2 as it's sometimes called. So one of the things that came up was, I'll go into the political side and the report side in a minute, but one of the specifics that came up was body armour. And so I will do a little bit about the body armour because I know about materials, so I will do a little bit on that. As an exemplar of what can go wrong and what can go right when you're in that sort of situation. And I can tell you a little bit about the mindset of the certainly British Army, but the other armies, like the Americans, are not dissimilar, and we know this from various things like the way they look upon. It's a mindset. What CHILCOT called a can-do mindset, which he said has its good and bad points basically. Okay, so this is about body armour, this first little bit, because this in a microcosm explains what can go wrong in war and maybe why it goes wrong. So these guys that I'm about to show you, it's on the History Channel, and it's just a few seconds of video where the American guys are in a military situation in Iraq in 2005, and so there's a guy gets hit by sniper fire.
Thankfully they miss, and Stephen and his unit continue the search. But it's hot work in the searing Iraqi summer.
Right now Doc's just standing outside his truck. I'm trying to figure out what was going on with everything.
That's Stephen right there, 10 months into his 12-month tour. Doc, as his buddies call him, is about to take a direct hit from the sniper's high-velocity rifle. Just 75 yards away, 2 Iraqi insurgents watch. They videotape.
So they're watching while this guy's there.
I was up in the gunner's hatch and I heard him yell, "I'm hit, I'm hit."
Yeah, so the guy got hit, but then he did survive.
We had lost.
So
Wearing this armor,
here's the guy here.
straight through, hit my heart, and I would have been dead before I hit the ground.
Stephen had a bruise on his chest, and the bullet grazed his thumb. He lost the thumbnail, but otherwise was unharmed. When his tour ended, he came home.
So that's Steve, and he obviously is glad to be alive, and it's body armour that did that. Now, body armour can be made out of different stuff. I mention this because there's one of the complaints levelled against what happened with the British Army is that they went in unprepared. Now, arguably, if the political will had been matched by the military preparedness, things might have gone a bit better for our boys and girls out there. But the problem is that in the end it's got to be up to the military to say that they're ready. And their mindset being, as CHILCOT described it, can do, is a problem. The trouble is that with organisations it's always the same. Organisations see troublemakers, and you see, to me, as somebody who's minded towards journalism and science and getting at the truth of something and all of that, troublemaker equals invaluable feedback. But for someone like the army, troublemaker equals disloyal. So this is a problem, because here's one incident that occurred apparently. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister at the time, went out to inspect the troops and to kind of boost morale and stuff. And of course these things are done at short notice, you see. They're done at short notice for the safety of the Prime Minister. So he flies out there, he gets a chopper for the last bit or whatever, and is visiting the troops. And the senior officers, or the middle ranking officers, the message went down: don't come out if you're in Greens. Anyone in Greens, stay away, because the Prime Minister doesn't want to see people who are not in the proper kit. Is it the soldier's fault that he or she is not in the proper kit? Of course it's not their fault. You don't think that somebody didn't mention it. Somebody mentioned it, and somebody upstairs said, yeah, we'll sort you out, and I don't mention it again. And on this occasion, they were told to stay away if they weren't in proper khaki gear. If they were in greens, as they call them, which is obviously right for Serbia, Kosovo, and the previous conflict that we had, or Northern Ireland perhaps, fine. But khaki is what you need for out in the desert. And, of course, they weren't in the proper kit, so they were told to stay away. So the Prime Minister finds what everybody finds who is a dignitary that comes round to inspect soldiers. Things are pretty much in order. And all the guys in greens are sat in their tent or gone out for a walk, or in a latrine, or whatever. Okay. So who's going to say something against that? Well, I'll come back to this, and we'll talk about the mindset in a minute. Back to the body armour. You get different materials for body armour, and there are different reasons why you have these different materials. The more expensive materials are stuff like Kevlar and ceramics, and now this is ceramic. This is a ceramic plate, but it's not the kind they have. What it actually turns out they mean is a material like aramid fibres, that's Kevlar to you and me. Kevlar is the proprietary name. They mean something that's made of fibres like that within it a ceramic plate. The ceramic plate does the stopping, and the job that it's meant to do is to splinter. Let's say that, for the sake of argument, this is not, but let's say this was a ceramic plate. The job that it's meant to do is to splinter the bullet, so that instead of getting something that travels at 2,600 feet per second or something, you get something that's going at 600 feet per second in several different little pieces. Okay? So it's meant to hit the hard ceramic plate and then split apart into several fragments. Each fragment, of course, is a quarter or a fifth or a tenth of the power of the original actual round. So the ceramic plate does the job of splintering it, and then the surrounding material, aramid fibres, Kevlar to you and me, or even just fiberglass, glass fibres, does the job of slowing it down. And what you find is it puffs open once the round hits it, and that's absorbed the energy in delaminating, because these things are made up of several layers, and they delaminate when the glue is smashed with enough energy, which a bullet has. But that soaks up energy to do that. I mean, it's like, if you had to do it physically, it's like a sledgehammer blow. So that's the kind of power you're talking about. Basically, the forces work out like this. A brief lesson in physics in 2 sentences. A small projectile has to go at a very high speed in order to deliver the same blow that a large projectile can deliver at a very slow speed. You hit someone with a sledgehammer, it doesn't have to be too high a velocity before it kills them. You hit someone with a bullet, it's got to be going at, supersonic. Okay. The other thing they use for body armour is polypropylene and polyethylene. And nylon 66 could be used. This, you're going to say this is a chopping board. Well, if you want it more tactical, we can have this. This is a black chopping board. That's an IKEA one. I use it to make other things out of because it's so tough. And you're going to say, well, how's that going to stop a bullet? I mean, you get it in all thicknesses and sizes. Here's another piece. That's something else. I chopped this down from something else. So how do you stop a bullet with that? Well, what a bullet does is it twists as it goes along. Because, as we know, there's rifling in barrels. These are the striations that they always talk about in CSI programs. But that twist can be used because as it tries to twist and bore into the plastic material, it melts it. But the plastic material very quickly hardens up again and sticks to the bullet. So let's say about half the energy is in the rotating motion in the bullet. Well, that means that half the energy is used once the bullets stop twisting. Okay, so in effect, it's like having a round coming at you at 1300 feet per second, not 2600 feet per second. So you've taken half the energy away. Any soldier would take those odds. So every material has its place. Think of an absolutely bulletproof material. Literally, the bullet does nothing to it. Imagine it like a quarter-inch of titanium. That's fine, except imagine wearing a quarter-inch of titanium and then a bullet hits you in the chest. okay, it hurts a lot to start with, but the bullet didn't go through. Brilliant, right? But no, it's the old Billy Connolly joke. He jokes about how his grandfather's pocket watch saved his life because the bullet hit the pocket watch and just, didn't go through it. But then he goes on to tell you how the ricocheted bullet blew the top of his head off because it went through his left nostril and blew the top of his head off. So that is extremely useless. So you need the two different kinds of material. You need one to stop the bullet and fragment it, and you need the other materials to absorb the energy and puff up, and that's how it usually works. The same goes for Land Rovers, and the snatched Land Rovers just didn't have much of the appropriate material. Now, Tony Blair was on this morning defending his actions, saying that although he apologises and he expresses apology, which as we all know is a qualified apology, he has been on more or less saying if he had the same situation he'd have to do the same thing, make the same decisions. But he certainly isn't responsible for the Army's choice of body armour. The Army should have said, we're not ready to go. We can send people, but here's the situation. Instead of that, of course, everyone wanted to step up and say, yes, we can do, as CHILCOT says. Well, that's a massive, massive problem. That's a mindset problem. Now you're not just talking about snatched Land Rovers being weakly defended with far too little armour. I mean, it took them basically, because I know a guy who was building the materials that they then put on Land Rovers to increase the armour plating, and a lot of it was glass fibre, because that's the cheapest. Because unfortunately the best time for you to get armour and stuff and money out of the government as the Army, or any branch of the military force, the best time for you to get the money out of them is when you're going to war. The worst time is when you've withdrawn and there's a lot of trouble at home about the war that you went into. And so what I saw was this guy who helped make these plates afterward in the factory. He's somewhere around Huddersfield or somewhere. And they made these protective plates for Land Rovers about that thick out of glass fibre, not aramid fibre. And I thought to myself, yeah, it will work, but it'll be relatively heavy and expensive, cheap. Big and thick and cheap. And that's your problem with body armour. How many plates of this shit can you carry? The ceramic plates weigh in, by the time you've got a decent chest ceramic plate, you're talking about 10 pounds of armour, including the textile pouch that goes around it. You put that all over your body, you must be talking about 30 or 40 pounds of extra weight. So how can you carry that lot around with you? The polypropylene, the same things you make milk jugs from. The polypropylene, I'm getting this from Coors Armour. Coors make armour plate. So how on earth can you carry all that around you? Well, you only have one speed when you're completely covered from head to toe in armour plate, and that's dead slow. And that's what they had in medieval times. They had steel plate and they carry it. It's brilliant if you're on a horse. As soon as you're off the horse, boy, you're just you're like that bit in Robocop where the guy's on the ground, they've got him down, and they start to chisel him open with pneumatic hammers and stuff. Pneumatic drills, it's inappropriate. You just can't move fast, and you're an easy, slow target. So snipers, like we saw earlier, I don't know how well it came out, but snipers are a real danger because you're slow moving. Even if you know they're there, it's bulky and difficult to move in it. So let's move on to the mindset. The Army have a can-do attitude. I've taken them on in courts, and I can tell you that they will cover up at the drop of a hat, and they will stick together at the drop of a hat. They will really come together and refuse to say anything about their superior officers or even their peers or anything about the military system. It's all perfectly fine, apparently. Famous battle, we've just been talking about the Somme and commemorating, not celebrating, commemorating the Somme and all the men that died, and it was almost exclusively men in the military that died. 250,000 or whatever died in the fields around Passchendaele, the third battle for Ypres in the First World War, and loads of men died in the mud and stuff, and they were just sent over wave after wave. And the history behind that is basically this. Allegedly at a party in Canada, you're going to say, what's this got to do with it? In a party in Canada, the industrialist Maxim, might have heard of Maxim, he said to people, I wonder what I'm going to do next, because he designed some stuff and made a load of money. And someone said, why don't you make a way to help the Europeans kill each other? And he came up with a Maxim machine gun and flogged it to the Germans. And they cut down. People called it the lawnmower, the grass cutter. They cut down the men that came over the top in the First World War. Just cut them down like weeds. And it's the most dreadful thing to see, wave after wave of men thrown in when it's completely pointless. After the first blast of fire, they should have realised that it meant the Germans were just going to sit there. And the dumbest thing in the world to do is to go over the top. There's other ways of handling it. Send groups of men tactically round the side of the front line and round to the back of them and stuff like that. But you don't face them head on and stuff. It's completely stupid. So let's move on to the mindset then. It's a mindset of can-do stroke shut the hell up. As I said earlier, troublemakers equals invaluable feedback. It all depends on your outlook. In 2002-2003 I did a degree. I'd done some earlier work so they let me do a degree, the honours degree in 1 year. And it was in the Business Information System course. But the thing I chose to do was this. Problem management in a technology-dependent environment. Okay? And that is for Leeds Metropolitan University, 2003 I finished it. Hey, this is stop a few bullets. So in this, I go into all the stuff. I've got a CD of it there. Modern now. I go through all this stuff about various organisations that are absolutely no good at listening to feedback. And apparently people coming from the front in Passchendaele, captains and stuff that were bringing back news that things were not going well, were told to stop bringing back news. So, consequences of failing to learn appropriately from operational feedback. That's a map of Ypres, and that's a picture of the front line. You can't see it very well probably, but that's some bodies in the mud. And all blood and mud. And then we go on to other organisations that are completely useless at listening to feedback. One of the other organisations, horrifyingly, is the NASA organisation. And it is it had that famous explosion of the Challenger spacecraft, and there was nothing to stop that happening, because even though they knew that I'm looking for the page here, even though they knew that the Challenger spacecraft was using seals that should not be used, they still went ahead and flew the spacecraft, causing the monumental failure of the space shuttle. So there's the smoke, that's all that was left of the projectiles as they became bits of the Challenger shuttle. And there's a little bit of text that went with it. And that's a photo courtesy of somebody called Jay Sullivan. 11:38 hours Eastern Standard Time on the 28th of January 1986. The temperature hardly ever went below 0 degrees. In fact, it hardly ever went below a few degrees in wherever it was that you took off. And this is... They didn't want to listen to the engineers who said, look, you're now at an unusually low temperature and the shuttle's been sat out for days in it. These seals might not work. So this has gone from chatter to absolute fact. The engineers told them not to go. NASA insisted on going because they'd been sat around for a while and put off so much they were impatient. What the engineers said was a very big risk happened. It was alright for about 20 seconds and then splat. And my system to solve this problem is called AnSAS, and it stands for An-nonymised Sender, Acknowledged Silver. In other words, someone who feels that they are not able to speak openly in an organisation, they need a method in order to speak openly to that organisation that the organisation A cannot ignore, and B as well as not being able to ignore it, the person is protected from saying anything. And so the whole thing I came up with in this tome was An-nonymised Sender, acknowledge solver. And that's all you can do with some of these organisations. You will never get to a situation where, I mean, look at the health service. It's exactly the same thing. You will never get to a situation where people feel safe enough to speak out. I've heard first and second-hand accounts of nurses being in operations where the doctor dabs some corrosive fluid onto a woman's clitoris. Having dealt with her abortion, he then goes on to put some of this corrosive material on her clitoris, which means she'll never have an orgasm again. And the nurses stand there and watch this. Nobody says a damn thing. How can that happen? You wonder, in a hospital environment, how can nurses stand by and let that happen to another woman? The mindset, remember, is they get the mindset that they want. These organisations, the army, the government, local government, the police, hospitals and health, they get a protectionist mindset. It's what they look for. They want, effectively, they want sheep, not wolves. One side had an employment tribunal against my employer that was an emergency service. I could never get a job again. That is just a fact. Winning didn't help. That didn't mean you were vindicated. That meant you were a successful troublemaker. Okay? So nobody wants to know. So your situation is that personnel departments deliberately employ people who are not the kind of people who speak out and talk back and give what I would describe as invaluable feedback. They don't want to know. I will now show you an example of a company that understands feedback. Wait 1 minute. Marmalade. You're going to say, what? Oh yes. Robertson's Golden Shred Marmalade. This is originally a Scottish company, and I don't know what the address is now they give, but they're a company that is, famed the world over, and they make jams and spreads, preserves. Notice the mascot. Okay, now that used to be a gollywog. I wrote them a letter, and I'm not saying I'm single-handedly responsible for Robertson's changing the mascot. But I wrote them a letter a few years back because my spouse, who's black, said, "Why do you buy racist marmalade?" I said, "Hold on," I said, "Look, this is tradition and history." I said, "It's not racism." She said, "Yeah, whatever." And to her, a gollywog is a racist symbol. The only place I've ever seen a gollywog recently was when we went to somewhere where they film a police series called Heartbeat, which is set back in the 50s, and they actually have gollywogs in the window there in one of the shops. It's a quaint little shop, they sell jams and things, they got gollywog. And I realised that it, like with the word, and I'll only say this a very few times in my life, the P word, Paki. Like with that word, it makes no difference to me, but Pakistani people and Muslims find it offensive, and it gets applied to Indian people as well, from the Indian continent. Okay. So I don't use it. I'm only using it here to exemplify, right? It's not something I'm happy using. If it bothers them, it's fine with me not to use it. Although I don't understand fully, but they must experience it a lot, and it's used by racist people. So to them, it becomes part of a racist story. Very easy for me to join in with them and say, I'm not going to be racist. I'm not going to encourage it. I wrote a letter to Robertson's, telling them that, look, the thing is, no black person's going to buy a product. And a lot of white people who are liberal-minded won't buy it either, because once they find out what black people think of it, they're not going to buy it because you have got effectively what is taken to be a racist emblem on your product. It may not be deliberate, and you're in no way meant to be offensive, but the fact is it is offensive. So, you know, I actually said at the time, I have no idea, I said, what you could possibly do to replace your gollywog. But, of course, I'd completely forgot about Paddington Bear. And Paddington Bear was the perfect emblem because he has marmalade sandwiches. Which, funnily enough, I think I even mentioned in the letter. I have this terrible ability to come up with a solution but not actually articulate it. Anyway, so Paddington Bear, this company, Robertson's Preserves, or whatever they're called, they understand feedback. I wrote them a letter. A few months later, they obviously had to think about it. They took it in good mind. I think I got a reply saying they would think about it, and they did, and they came up with the perfect emblem. Okay, they sell other spreads as well, but because marmalade's a big thing, they got it absolutely bang on. And in fact, the gollywog, when you think about it, although it's historic, that's all it's got going for it. It has nothing to do with marmalade. Whereas Paddington Bear has his marmalade sandwiches and is famous for it. Okay, so unlike the army, the hospitals, the police, who remember covered up Hillsborough and tried to rewrite statements, in fact did rewrite statements, and the government and local councils, Robertsons value feedback. You're not a troublemaker. You're invaluable feedback. Now, I don't know how the fortunes have gone since, but I know that some black people might now buy their marmalade. And this, ANSAS, was my solution. An-nonymised Sender, Acknowledged Solver. Now, the reason why I'm seen as a troublemaker is because I don't mind speaking out. In fact, you get these anonymous surveys, most of the time I write my name at the bottom. Because